My name is Rachel Matthews, and on November 14th, 2008, my life changed forever. I never imagined that a simple drive home from work would lead to my death, nor did I ever think that everything I believed about faith, giving, and my relationship with God would be completely transformed. I had always considered myself a devoted Christian. I went to church every Sunday, volunteered when I could, and most importantly, I tithed faithfully. From the time I got my first job as a teenager, I made sure to give exactly 10% of every paycheck. It was something I never questioned. My pastor taught that tithing was a requirement, a way to show obedience, and that God would bless those who gave. I believed that as long as I did my part, faithfully giving what belonged to Him, then He would take care of me. I didn't just see tithing as an act of faith. I saw it as a guarantee of blessings. That day, I left work later than usual. It had been a long, exhausting afternoon, and I was already thinking about everything I needed to do when I got home. I had bills to pay, groceries to pick up, and I needed to check my bank account to make sure I had enough left over to cover my tithe before anything else. The thought of missing it never even crossed my mind. I knew that if I failed to give, I would risk falling out of favor with God. I sighed, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I made my way down the highway. The next thing I remember was the sound of screeching tires, a blaring horn, and then nothing. When I first became aware of what was happening, I felt a strange weightlessness, as if I were floating. I didn't feel any pain, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The scene before me didn't make sense. I could see flashing lights, twisted metal, and a group of paramedics working frantically over a motionless body inside a mangled car. It took a moment for me to understand what I was looking at, and when I did, sheer disbelief washed over me. I was looking at my own body. Everything felt surreal, as if I were watching a movie playing out before my eyes. I saw my broken form lying still, my face pale, blood trickling from my forehead. The paramedics were shouting, trying to revive me, but I already knew it was useless. I had died, yet I wasn't afraid. There was no pain, no panic, only an eerie calmness, as if I were being held in place by something greater than myself. Then something shifted. A light unlike anything I had ever seen appeared in the distance. It wasn't like the sunlight or anything earthly. It was pure, radiant, alive. I felt an overwhelming pull toward it, and before I could even process what was happening, I was moving, being drawn into its presence. As the wreckage of my accident faded behind me, I knew without a doubt that I was crossing over into the afterlife. The moment I entered the light, I was surrounded by a sense of peace and love beyond human comprehension. It felt as though I was being completely embraced by something greater than myself, something that knew me fully, every thought, every intention, every secret part of my heart. Then, suddenly, I saw my entire life unfold before me. It wasn't just memories flashing by. It was as if I was reliving every moment all at once, feeling everything I had ever done, not just from my own perspective, but through the eyes of God. At first, I saw the beautiful moments, times when I had shown love, when I had comforted others, when I had prayed sincerely. But then, the vision shifted, and I saw something that made my heart sink. I saw every single time I had given my tithe, I watched myself placing my checks into the offering plate every Sunday, writing out my donations, making sure I never failed to give. At first, I thought this was a good thing. Hadn't I been obedient? Hadn't I done what God commanded? But then, I felt something I had not expected. Instead of the joy and approval I thought I would see, I felt emptiness. I saw my own true motivations laid bare, and it broke me. My giving had never come from love, faith, or a joyful heart. It had come from obligation, fear, and even pride. I saw how many times I had expected something in return, believing that because I tithed, God owed me blessings. I saw the moments when I had resented giving, when I had worried about my finances but still gave out of duty, fearing that if I didn't, I would lose favor with God. The realization hit me like a wave. I had never truly trusted God with my heart. I had trusted in a formula, believing that my obedience would force God to bless me. I had reduced my relationship with Him to a transaction, rather than surrendering to Him fully. Tears filled my eyes as I watched the truth of my life unfold before me. Just as I felt my heart breaking under the weight of what I had seen, I became aware of a presence standing before me. I looked up, and in that moment, I knew without a doubt who He was. It was Jesus. There are no words that can describe what it was like to look into His eyes. They held love deeper than the ocean, yet a sorrow that pierced my soul. I immediately fell to my knees, unable to stand in the presence of such holiness. Every insecurity, every flaw, every false belief I had ever held was laid bare before Him, and I felt unworthy even to be in His presence. Then He spoke, "Rachel, why did you give?" His voice wasn't filled with condemnation or anger. It was filled with love, sadness, and truth. I felt my entire body tremble as I struggled to answer. I wanted to tell Him that I gave out of obedience, that I had followed His word. But I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, because I thought I had to, because I believed it would bring me blessings, because I was afraid that if I didn't, you would be disappointed in me. Jesus nodded, as if He had been waiting for me to realize it myself. Then He spoke words that would forever change me. "You cannot buy my love. You cannot purchase my blessings. I have already given you everything." I gasped, the weight of His words sinking in. For years, I had thought of tithing as a spiritual obligation, something I had to do in order to remain in God's favor. But now I understood I had been giving for all the wrong reasons. Jesus stepped closer, His presence radiating an overwhelming peace. Tithing was never about money. It was always about trust. But your trust was in your own works, not in me. In that moment, my entire understanding of faith shifted. It had never been about the money itself. It had been about surrender. True giving wasn't about following a rule. It was about trusting God fully, knowing that He is the provider, not a formula or a percentage. I watched as He stretched out His hand toward me, and in an instant, I saw what true giving looked like. I saw people giving out of love, not obligation. I saw people offering their time, their kindness, their generosity, not because they had to, but because their hearts were full of trust in Him. I realized then that giving was not a duty, it was an act of worship. As I stood there, my heart trembling from the weight of what Jesus had just revealed to me, I suddenly felt the atmosphere shift. The light around us dimmed, not into complete darkness, but into something unsettling. It was as if the warmth of his presence was still there, yet a deep sorrow lingered in the air. I looked at him, confused, and he gently turned my attention towards something in the distance. In an instant, I was no longer in the place of light. I was standing on the edge of what I can only describe as a place of deep regret, sorrow, and separation. It wasn't the fiery torment that many imagine hell to be, but it was far worse in a different way. It was a place of emptiness, a place where people wandered, lost in their own sorrow, burdened by the weight of what they had chosen in life. I saw men and women, their faces filled with grief, clutching at the air as if trying to hold on to something they had lost. They weren't screaming in agony, but their expressions carried an unshakable sadness, the realization that they had wasted their lives chasing the wrong things. I turned to Jesus, my breath caught in my throat. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me with a heavy sorrow in his eyes. "These are the ones who lived for themselves, who gave out of obligation but never gave their hearts to me. They followed rituals, obeyed rules, and believed they were righteous, but they never truly knew me." Tears welled up in my eyes. I saw people who had lived what seemed like good, religious lives, yet they were here, separated from God, because they had only gone through the motions of faith without ever surrendering themselves fully to Jesus. Then, I saw something that shook me to my core. I saw myself, not the version of me standing there with Jesus, but the version of me before I died. I saw myself sitting in church, placing my tithe into the offering plate, feeling satisfied that I had done what was required. I saw myself giving, but only giving because I was taught that it would secure my blessings. I saw myself worshiping, but my mind was already thinking about my finances, my obligations, my fears. Jesus reached out and touched my shoulder. "Rachel, you were heading down this path. You did not know me the way you thought you did, but I have given you another chance." I fell to my knees, sobbing. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to live like that. He knelt beside me, lifting my chin so that I could look into his eyes. "Then surrender. Give not because you have to, but because you trust me. Live not by rules, but by relationship. It has never been about what you do. It has always been about who you are in me." At that moment, everything inside me changed. I no longer saw faith as a checklist, a system of rules and rewards. I understood now that true faith was about surrender, trust, and love. Then he spoke once more. "Rachel, it is time to go back. There is more for you to do." I shook my head, tears still streaming down my face. "I don't want to leave you. I never want to be apart from you again." He smiled. "I will never leave you, but you have a purpose to fulfill. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them the truth." And with that, the light around me exploded, and I was pulled back. I gasped for air as my eyes flew open. The beeping of hospital monitors surrounded me, and I felt an overwhelming weight in my chest, not from fear, but from the sheer realization that I had been given a second chance. I could feel my mother's hand clutching mine, her sobs of relief filling the room. Doctors and nurses rushed to my bedside, stunned that I was awake. I was alive, but I was not the same person who had left that body hours earlier. Over the next few days, I struggled to find the words to explain what had happened. How could I tell people that I had met Jesus? How could I explain that I had seen the truth about tithing, about worship, about what it really means to follow God? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the people in that place of regret. I saw myself there, and I knew I could never go back to the way I was before. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I returned home a changed woman. The first Sunday I went back to church, I sat in my usual seat, watching as the offering plate was passed around. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the old pressure, the silent expectation that I had to give to secure God's favor. Instead, I felt freedom. I reached into my purse, not because I felt obligated, but because I felt grateful. I had been given another chance. I had been pulled from the path of religious routine and placed on the path of true surrender. I wasn't giving because I was trying to buy blessings. I was giving because I loved Jesus. At first, I was hesitant to share what I had seen. I worried that people wouldn't believe me, that they would call me crazy. But the more I thought about those lost souls I had seen in my vision, the more I realized that I couldn't keep this to myself. The first time I told someone, my best friend Angela, she listened in stunned silence. When I finished, she shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Rachel, I've been tithing for years, and I've never even thought about why I do it. I've just been following the rules." That was when I knew. This message wasn't just for me. It was for so many others. The more I shared, the more I saw resistance. Some people didn't want to hear the truth. They were too attached to the idea that tithing guaranteed financial blessings. They couldn't accept that God wasn't a vending machine, that they couldn't buy their way into His favor. But then something beautiful happened. Slowly, hearts began to change. I saw people giving joyfully, not because they had to, but because they wanted to reflect God's love. I saw people giving in ways beyond money, through their time, their kindness, their prayers. I saw people letting go of fear-based faith and stepping into true trust in God. If you have ever thought that tithing is about securing blessings, let me tell you, Jesus doesn't want your money. He wants your heart. He wants you to give out of love, not fear. He wants you to trust Him, not a formula. Surrender everything to Him, not just your finances, but your whole life. Give because you love Him, not because you feel obligated. Worship Him not just with your hands, but with your heart. And if this story has spoken to you, share it. Someone needs to hear this truth. Because in the end, Jesus is not after our wealth, He is after our hearts.